Brandon, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you for taking the time. So this book's been out for about a month, and I know that your fans, your many fans, were waiting for it quite impatiently.
Yes, well, I would say they were patient. They had to wait through me finishing 2 books in the Wheel of Time before I got this sequel to them. So they waited way longer than they should have to wait to get a book like this.
Well, a book like this, though, this is a massive undertaking. I mean, in terms of not just length, but the sophistication of it. And as I said, people were really waiting for it. I know there was a lot of speculation, what's going to happen. So what has been the reaction as you traveled around meeting your fans, and what about it has surprised you?
The reaction has been fantastic. These fans have been very patient and very friendly, and I like being a writer because the fan-to-author interaction is this wonderful experience. It's a lot more like being colleagues, I feel, than it is for some other areas of fandom. When someone reads one of my books, what they're doing is they're participating in it, right? They're not just speculating. They're imagining their part of it, the characters, how they sound, the details of what they look like, and things like this. And that creates, in my experience, at least with the authors I've met that I love to read, more of a rapport and sort of a relationship where we have worked together on this piece of art. It's been a fantastic response. There are always things you don't expect, and with me, I should have learned to expect it by now. But fans will latch on to things that are completely unanticipated. On this tour, there's a scene in the book where a current character is learning to transform matter into another type of matter, and in this world, to do this, you actually have to have a dialogue with the inanimate object. I know it's fantasy, it's kind of weird, but it works really well in the scene. And so she's trying to change a stick into fire to start a fire. And this stick does not want to become fire, and she keeps pleading with him. It's like, no, I'm a stick. So I started getting these questions on tour. So is the stick going to make a reappearance? When can we expect more from the stick? And it just completely blindsided me. I'm like, the stick? What stick? Oh, that stick from that one scene that we had on page, like 2 pages? That's the thing they latched onto, is the stick. Yeah.
Well, that was a very powerful and authentic stick, obviously.
Yes, a very authentic stick. That's what my editor said when I told him. He's like, well, we'll just take it as a compliment that even the sticks have a lot of personality in your books.
Absolutely. But, for your books to work, you have to completely immerse people in this world, and they have to buy everything about it, including the stick. So what is the key to creating, from your own imagination, creating a world that is so authentic to people that they can fully believe it and fully immerse themselves?
Well, this is what originally drew me as a reader to epic fantasy. This sense of immersion, the sense that the world is a real place, or could be, or for the time reading the book it could be. I remember watching interviews with the actors who were working on the Lord of the Rings films, and them talking about the depth of history and how they would wear elvish undergarments when they're acting, just because this was part of the whole experience. And this is what epic fantasy tries to do. We're telling a story in a world that doesn't exist, but between those covers, while you're reading, that world needs to become a real place. And I love that. It is the challenge of reading and writing an epic fantasy book. Now, we focus a lot on the world building. I always like to mention before we get into this that a world is only as interesting as the people that inhabit it, and a plot is only as exciting as the people you care about are in danger. And so a great story, regardless of its genre, is going to have this focus on really compelling characters. And I feel that's got to be number one. You can have a lame world and great characters and have a great book, but if you have lame characters and a great world, you're still going to have a lame book, I feel. But part of what we do in epic fantasy is we try to add this dimension of immersion, and we try to treat the world like another character, and try to build it like we would build a character. Just like you want to believe those characters are real while you're reading the book, you want to believe this world is a real place. And so the job of an epic fantasy writer is to create that convincing narrative, that sense that this all exists. And when I create these books, one of the things I'm looking to do is ask myself, how can I help the sense of immersion? This is why when you open up the book and there are these illustrations, I try to make them in-world illustrations. They're pieces of and fragments of the cultures that you're reading about to give you this added visual dimension to them. And it is the grand skill of the epic fantasy writer to be able to get this all across without just piling it on top of you. I mean, any epic fantasy book could read like an encyclopedia. And that's the danger, is when our books stray into feeling like an encyclopedia. Wow, I'm just reading an entry about this world rather than experiencing life in it. And learning to get that across, that's what takes years and years of practice.
Well, this series in particular, because of the sheer length of it, I mean, you've got to make all of these events hold together. And, something that happens, in page 100 obviously influences something that happens on page 900. So I'm wondering, when you are writing your characters, I mean, a lot of authors talk about how their characters will do something that surprises them. And I'm thinking, how would that work for you? I mean, if someone did something that surprised them, that could really throw things off. And I guess, does that happen with you? That a character does something unexpected?
Well, you're getting into one of kind of the classic writing questions. How much do you outline? How much do you freeform it? When you outline a lot, you tend to have a more complicated, intricate plot because of it. But when you outline a lot, you also risk the danger of having your characters just become these wooden things that move through a sequence of events rather than being people. And a lot of times when you did what we call discovery write, when you invent your story as you go along, you allow your characters a lot more freedom over what's happening, and your characters tend to grow to be more vibrant, but your plot tends to wiggle a lot. And all writers have to kind of find their balance between these two. I'm naturally more of an outliner. And so I try to come up with a very detailed and complex outline, and then I start casting people in roles for these characters, and I do allow them the freedom to rewrite the outline as I'm writing it. For me, it's less of a character surprising me and more of the character that I've built would not make this decision that the plot calls for them to make, which then requires me to go back to my outline and do a lot of re-outlining and rebuilding. And this can knock down entire important sections of the outline. It just happened with this book, where we knocked something, a kind of what felt like a support wall for the third book got knocked down because of things I feel the characters needed to do as I was writing book 2. And so for me, that experience is it's always energizing, it's always wonderful, but it's always, oh no, there's a lot of work coming as well. And I sat down with my assistants and I said, I just knocked out the support wall because of who this character is and what they're doing. Now we're going to have to rebuild outline number 3, and it's going to have ramifications on the whole plot for the entire sequence. But this sort of contrast is really important, this push and pull between outline and character, to allow me to have the explosive endings I want to have while still maintaining the sense that the characters are alive, they are people, they have decisions, and they don't simply run through a bunch of preset deterministic points.
Well, I know that Way of Kings had such a huge fan base. And as I said, there's so much anticipation for Words of Radiance. As you were writing it, did you feel a huge pressure to surpass the first book?
There certainly was some of that. Surpassing the first book. Every time you have something successful, something that people enjoy, you ask yourself as an artist, wow, have I just peaked? Is that it? And that is a sense that as a writer you have to not let destroy you. I have writer friends that had something get very successful, and then it was very hard for them to write anything more. I have a bit of a leg up in this area in that I spent many years toiling in obscurity. I wrote 13 novels before I sold one, and I learned really to write for myself what I love to write, explore the stories that I want to tell, and I have to quiet that voice. Granted, I want every book to be awesome, to be more awesomer than the one before it, to use internet lingo. I want each book to get better and better, and I'm always striving to make these books incredible. But I can't let that sense of what you just said, the sense that, oh no, can I ever top that, keep me from writing. I write because of these stories that I want to tell, and I have to get these stories out of my head. It's what turned me into what I am. And so I just keep going. I just keep writing. And that's kind of the theme of who I am, is I just keep writing stuff. And hopefully people will continue to want to read the things that pop out of my head. But even if they didn't want to, I would keep writing them.
I don't think that'll be a problem anytime soon. But you know, I saw you quoted in an interview saying, "We haven't hit what epic fantasy is really capable of doing yet." Was that an accurate quote?
Yeah, I really do feel that this genre is still very much in its infancy. Epic fantasy as a subgenre. Granted, the greater umbrella of speculative fiction has explored a great number of awesome things, and epic fantasy has done that as well, but in a much more narrow band. And I feel like this genre, just as a fan, I kind of see that we had Tolkien, and Tolkien was awesome, and then we had an era that was very inspired by Tolkien, and now we're running into this sort of era of epic fantasy where those of us who grew up not reading Tolkien, but the people inspired by Tolkien, are reacting against them. And so I don't know where this is going to go, but I have a feeling that in the coming decades, it may not be my generation that does it, that this genre is going to expand to something that you know, those of us writing right now can't even imagine. It is the genre that has no bounds. Every other genre, there are limitations. Now, that's kind of pompous of me perhaps to say that, but once you stray into the implausible or the impossible becoming a story, that's fantasy. And that's what our genre is all about. And this is the genre where there are no rules. There are no "you can't do this." And I feel that because of that, this genre can go far further than it has in the past.
And what about for you? I mean, do you feel that you are close to achieving what you're capable of, or do you think that you have, you know, I guess, accomplishments that exceed what you've already done?
You know, that's the sort of question that I feel could lead me down a path that would keep me from writing. I have to write the best stories I can in the now, and I have to hope that I'm always going to be doing new and interesting things, because otherwise I'll get bored. If you look at my body of work, I am frequently jumping between projects. I don't stay with one thing very long, though I keep returning to the same ideas. I feel this is because just my nature as a writer. Once I do get done with something, I feel like I need to do something completely different in order to be excited about it, to try something new. And so this is why you see all of these different little projects and things that I do. And so I'm hoping that leads me as a writer to always being incorporating new things, to be learning new things, to be creating greater and greater stories. But I don't know. I mean, what artist doesn't want to get better the longer they produce? There are very few artists who've been capable of it. I feel that Terry Pratchett in the fantasy genre is one of those that's gotten better and better as he's written longer and longer. Most of us hit a certain level, and we keep producing great stuff at that level. Hopefully, you know, I don't want that to happen to me, but I can't really say. All I've got to do is write the stories that I want to write.
Well, I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about your terrific podcast.
Oh, thank you.
With writing excuses, and I'm guessing there may be some of your loyal readers who don't know about the podcast yet, and I think they should. And it as I said, it's called Writing Excuses, and you do it with 3 other writers who I assume are close friends of yours, and it's terrific. It's writing tips, inspiration. First of all, I wanted to ask you, you're so busy. Why do you take the time to do this?
So when I decided I wanted to be a writer, very early in my life, but a little bit later than many, I was a teenager. After I discovered fantasy novels, decided I wanted to be a writer. I realized I had no idea how to do this. It's this weird thing, like, how do you become a writer? Who do you talk to? I didn't know anybody who was a professional writer, and I remember the very first time I got any sort of information or advice was at a local science fiction convention. Catherine Kurtz was the guest of honor, and I had applied to a little local contest for the convention. I actually won that writing contest, and she was impressed by that, and she sat down with me, and she chatted with me for like 45 minutes on being a writer and on the process and things like this. And it started to dawn on me that really the only way that you get better as a writer is you practice. The only way to get advice is from other writers, and it's hard to find them. And the internet offers us this greater opportunity for interaction and meeting of people like this. And I wanted to use the tools that we have to try and do something that would work like that. That time where Catherine Kurtz sat down with me, Dave Wolverton/Farland, he writes under two names, he did this with me later on. And most of the best advice, most of what I know about writing I got from sitting down with other writers and listening to them tell me about writing. So the podcast is an attempt to do that, using the internet and the mediums that we have.
Has it helped your work at all, having that process of analyzing different parts of your craft yourself, or listening to your co-writers as they're analyzing it? Has that helped you as a writer?
Oh, most definitely. First off, as you mentioned, the other writers on the podcast are fantastic, and so their advice and their methodology is something I like listening to, and it gives me a lot of help. But beyond that, as a writer, when I sit down to write, I'm working mostly by instinct, and I think most writers are. Writing, it is an art. It is partially a craft, but when you sit down, you just do it, and you follow your instincts. The podcast and teaching my class that I do and things like this, they force me to step back and say, okay, what am I actually doing here? Can I break down these pieces? Can I look at what the instincts are, what resources they're using, what they're grabbing, how they're going about creating these stories? And learning to think that way about my writing, number one, has helped me to be able to explain the process a lot better to other people. But beyond that, when I run into a problem in my writing, I can step back out of the kind of instinctive writer mode and go more into analyst, English major mode, so to speak, and say, what is going on here? What is stopping me? What isn't working? And I can try these strategies. I can look at what's worked in the past by instinct and apply them very actively instead. And it has helped my writing in great measure.
I also wanted to talk to you about sort of the market realities of what you do, especially with this new book, Words of Radiance. I mean, it's almost 1,100 pages long. And as I'm sure you know all too well, it's very expensive to publish a book like that, with the printing costs. And, they can't make it 3 times as expensive as a 300-page book. They just can't. Do you, and I know you've been able to do it because of your success.
Right.
Do you feel that by successfully publishing a book like this, that you are opening the way for other writers to be able to do that as well?
Well, that would be awesome. I do know that J.K. Rowling pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable in length for a YA book during her era certainly did help longer YA books get consideration. I write them this length because I feel that's the story I want to tell. However, there are lots of cool things happening with the internet. There are people who are serializing stories now, and the serialized methodology the serialized method can help take one of these bigger books and make it into more manageable chunks, both for the reader and for the writer. They are very expensive to produce. I know that my publisher would prefer that I were somehow splitting these into multiple parts. But to their credit, they are willing to publish them at the length I say, because I feel this is the piece of art that I want to write. I don't think that, I think you should, as a writer, tell the story and make the art you feel needs to be told. And whether that's very short or very long, it shouldn't matter as much as what does the story need. But I do think that more than what I'm doing, the new technological options are opening those doors.
Okay. Well, this has been great. I know that we have a lot of your fans watching right now who are dying to ask you some questions. So I am going to turn it over to our moderator, and he will take some questions from readers.
Okay, awesome.
That is correct. It's time for us to take a few reader and audience questions. You can go ahead and type your questions for Brandon in the chat box, and he will answer live. So let's go to some of the questions that we have here. First, Sam from Chattanooga, Tennessee writes, do you find it difficult to write outside of sci-fi? I'm sure there are plenty of things that you write in your personal life or wherever. When you're writing outside the sci-fi genre, has it been difficult for you? I'm sure it hasn't because you're a professional writer, but just can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, the only things that I will write outside right now, my fiction, will be things like blog posts and essays and whatnot. And fortunately, I have academic training. I've got a master's in English, and I just fall back on those chops, those skills that I've learned. When I sit down to write something fiction-wise, I have not yet written something that I didn't insert some sort of science fiction or fantasy twist to. It's what fascinates me. It's what I like to read, and so I end up doing it. So maybe someday I would have trouble doing that if I decided I wanted to, but so far it's really either nonfiction or it's speculative fiction.
You mentioned a little bit that you read a lot of fantasy, but do you read anything outside the fantasy genre?
I do. I do try to read widely. Mostly it's going to be nonfiction. If it's outside, I read a lot of science fiction, fantasy, urban fantasy, all speculative things. Otherwise, if I'm reading something, I'm probably either reading a thriller to kind of study how they put together stories and pacing, or mysteries, particularly for their plots and their twists. But I don't read a ton of mainstream fiction. I have read some, and you're going to find me in those three genres: mystery, thriller, or sci-fi fantasy. Mostly sci-fi fantasy. If I'm dipping into other genres, it's mostly because I want to learn what they're doing and see if I can steal it wholesale, so to speak. Learning as a writer, often you take someone's work and say, what's working here? Let me study this and see if I can make it work for my own fiction.
Absolutely. Another question we had, pre-submitted actually, is in all your books, what was your favorite scene? If you had to pick one scene that was your favorite to write, what was that scene?
Boy. I would say Perrin forging his hammer in Towers of Midnight, because Perrin was my favorite Wheel of Time character, and being able to participate in the Wheel of Time as a fan and as a writer was a supremely satisfying experience.
Okay, that's definitely good to know. Thank you. Another question that we just had pop up on the chat is, which character from the Stormlight series do you personally relate with best?
I've had this question before, and I always have trouble answering it because as a writer, you put a little bit of yourself into every character, but you also try to put into every character something very not like yourself, very distinctive from yourself, so that you can be creating this blend. There's never a character that's not going to have a bit of you in them, because it's how you start. It's the seed that grows a character. And so I relate and don't relate to every character that I've written. I often fall back on Dalinar simply because I've been planning to write him the longest, but I wouldn't say I'm the most like Dalinar by any means. So I have really no idea. Maybe Shallan? I don't know. I don't know who I'm most like.
Well, there is one character that your people are talking about a lot in the chat right now, and that is Hoid. Someone was wondering about if Hoid travels from world to world, and maybe you could comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, Hoid is the character who runs between all of my epic fantasies. He shows up in all of them. He is not me. He is very different from me. He's a whole lot more clever, for one thing. But yeah, he does travel between the worlds. He has a story that's happening behind the story, so to speak, and I will make that more clear as the books progress.
Okay, great. Let's see what else we have here. A lot of people, you talked earlier about the stick and talking with the stick. And once you mentioned that, the chat room has exploded and everybody's been talking about the stick nonstop. Is there anything else you can add about the stick?
Oh boy.
Will the stick reappear? But maybe a little bit about the personification of inanimate objects.
Personification.
I wouldn't rehash this, but everybody's talking about it so much.
Yes. So one of the themes in the Stormlight Archive is this idea that it is Asian, but it's also originally Greek, mixing these ideas of the sort of Shinto Asian idea that everything has a soul, with the idea of Plato speaking about the forms and everything's ideal nature, that there's a spiritual component to all sides. This is what I'm working with, is sort of the part of the foundation of the Cosmere, the shared universe, this idea that everything does have a personality, even if it's a very dry personality, as well as a spiritual component. So yes, inanimate objects talking and being alive has been a theme from my books in the Cosmere from the very beginning. And you will find it in my very first published book, Elantris. You will find the idea of concepts coming alive and speaking to people. You will find inanimate objects coming alive in various books of mine. And it is part of this whole underpinning mythology for the shared universe that I want to make more and more visible as the the multiple series progress.
What advice do you have for writers who are new to fantasy and trying to earn their chops in the business?
Well, certainly if you're new to reading fantasy, I would say to immerse yourself in the genre. I would read some of the classics, but I would focus my attention on what is being published right now so that you can become part of the discussion. One of the things that I feel is important as a writer is being part of the discussion, being part of what's going on out there, and knowing what your colleagues are doing and admiring their work while trying to add something to it or to react against it to create something new and interesting. If you were trying to break into fantasy right now, and you're a writer who is experienced with the genre, I would say, awesome. We need lots of new voices. Ask yourself what you add distinctively. What is it that you can add to this genre that is lacking? Where are the holes? What stories aren't being told that you can tell? And how can you add this to this great patchwork of the genre as a whole? That's what I would suggest. What is your individual voice? What is distinctive about you? What is distinctive about your heritage or your knowledge or your passions that you can make a great story out of?
Another question we had was that religion seems to be a theme in a lot of the books. Can you comment a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm a religious person, and as a religious person, religion fascinates me. The ways religion is used, both for advantage and disadvantage in society, the wonderful things religion has accomplished and the terrible things that religion have accomplished, all fascinate me. And I find myself coming back to this theme because I want to explore it. I say, oh, I haven't explored this aspect. How does a character who thinks this way deal with religion? How does this culture deal with this new and different aspect of a religion? Through the course of human history, religion has been one of the driving principles in human existence. And I feel that if we don't touch on it, certainly there are books that don't, and that's fine, because there's so much to do in epic fantasy that you can't make everything a theme for a given book. But I feel that it being one of my passions, something that I'm knowledgeable about, that if I don't touch on it and explore it in all of its different varieties, that I am not exploring my own voice in the way that I should. So you will see me coming back to this and asking these questions. Questions I ask myself, questions I hear people asking, and dealing with them as I build characters around those questions.
In a little bit of a lighter topic, Amy from Oregon writes, what process do you use to collaborate for the illustrations and the maps in your books?
That's an excellent question. So originally, it was a lot more loose than it is now. Originally, I would write the book and say, okay, I need a map. What am I going to do? And I'd go to one of my friends who was an artist and say, here's what I have. And I would hold up this thing that was like an MS Paint or, a scribbled, terrible piece of art and say, "Can you make this awesome?" And we would, I would hand it to them and see what they come up with. As time has progressed and I've become more knowledgeable about this and had a stronger desire to be more involved with the art, I have hired an art director that works just with me, that we talk about different types of art and what will match and what will fit. We try to come up with much better descriptions. We generally are looking for artists. We're watching online for people who are doing really interesting fan art for my books, and often approaching them and saying, "Hey, may have a project for you." We could also bring Isaac in. We can ask Isaac. Isaac, what's your opinion on this? This is Isaac, art director and illustrator for many of my books.
Hi. So process.
Hi, Isaac.
Process. It's usually. We do a lot of chatting with Brandon. We go back and forth. I draw sketches. I show them to him. Sometimes I'll show him targets. Basically, hey, I'd like to do a map like this, or hey, why don't we do a piece of art that's like this in this style? And then we just discuss things back and forth until...
You know, the thing that I like that we do the most, and this happens with Ben too, is we'll get a page full of like 9 different options that take an idea 9 different ways. And then Isaac will say, okay, what are your 3 favorites? And then you'll take those 3 and do 9 based on each of those 3 that take it all in the idea in different ways. And we come up with a lot of our icons, our maps, our sketches by doing that.
Nice to see you, Isaac. I think everybody in the chat room is very excited to see Isaac as well. You touched, we're getting close to the end of time here, but another fan question was that you touched upon how, basing characters on yourself, and there's a little bit of your own personality in every character, but are there any characters that are inspired by individuals that you know and that you love, family members, friends, associates? Are there any characters like that?
Yeah, usually there are. In any given book, there'll be a few. Often they're side characters that I'm doing as cameos, but once in a while, some aspect of somebody I know will drive me to design a character around that aspect. Meaning the character is not that person, but the person has one interesting, well, they'll have many interesting elements that I'll latch onto. And I'll say, I need to build a character around this conflict. This concept is so awesome. I'm going to use it, and I'm going to extrapolate it a different direction. And this happens with people I know. It also happens with characters from films or books that I read, where I'll say, wow, this one element of this character I feel could be expanded into its own different character and go a completely different direction. It's just the way that we world build, the way that we tell stories, a lot of us as writers.
And last question, this comes from Alec from Ontario, Canada, and he asks, which has been your favorite character out of all your characters to write?
My favorite character to write? This one is very difficult for the same reasons I mentioned before, picking any one. While I'm writing that character, Robert Jordan always answered this question by saying the one I'm writing right now. I can say that it's very hard to pick any of my own characters for questions like this because I've always approached them as a writer. And so when I come to questions like this, you'll see me going to Wheel of Time answers because I was a fan for 17 years and built all of my fan sort of experiences, and then I came to the books and was able to make use of those fan experiences. And so my favorite character to write in the Wheel of Time ended up being Matt, who was also the hardest by far to write. And I would say this because getting done with those books, I really wanted to spend more time with Matt. And it's impossible to spend more time with Matt, but it was sad to leave him behind. And so that's an answer I often fall back on. But the real true answer is, it's the character I'm writing right now. Whoever it is, they are the one that I need to know the best and be most passionate about for that scene.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for your time. Those are some great answers there. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions that we had because there were lots of them, but we got to as many as we could. Like I said, that brings us about to the end of our event tonight. Before I let you go, though, I want to remind everyone about the books for sale. You can purchase a signed and personalized copy of Words of Radiance right here on this page. Those sales will close tomorrow night, so make sure you get your order in by then, and Brendon will sign and personalize the copy for you, and then King's English in Salt Lake City will ship it right to your door. we'd like to give a big thank you to the Kings of English for hosting this event, and thank you to everyone who joined us tonight and submitted questions, and thank you to Brandon and Karen. It was such a pleasure having you tonight on Book Talk Nation, so thank you very much, everybody.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.